Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSPs. Ukraine War News Update, second part there for the 18th of June 2024. I just want to give a corrective to a claim I made, or at least an insinuation I made at the end of the last video. There was an image of a Russian sub in Cuba, and it had a couple of holes where the cladding, the acoustic tiles have fallen off the side, and I was saying, oh, that's not looking good for that submarine. Apparently acoustic tiles can fall off submarines regularly. They often need to be replaced as they come back into port, so I need to make that correction to what I said earlier. Okay, moving on to military aid. So the European Commission has set up an audit commission to oversee a €50 billion loan to Ukraine. The audit commission is designed to help Kyiv monitor the use of the aid provided, as well as prevent fraud, corruption, and conflicts of interest. At least 6 meetings will be held annually to discuss the results of the audits, and at least 6 visits to Kyiv. The commission itself will be based in Brussels. This is really useful. The US has similar sort of protocols in place, or systems in place, to make sure that there is oversight to all of the aid going to Ukraine from the US. That's obviously very important to try and combat the narratives that Russia pumps out that there are weapons going onto the black market. So there needs to be transparency, there needs to be accountability, and a clear paper trail, if you like, of weapons and how they're getting used, and money and how that's being used. So that's really good news from the European Commission there, to make sure that things are bona fide. Okay, quote, the US is, quote, deliberately delaying, end quote, the training of Ukrainian pilots for the F-16, according to Utsinova, head of the Special Parliamentary Commission on Arms and Ammunition. Quote, delay means that by the end of the year, Ukraine will likely have only 20 pilots on F-16. For now, we'll have fewer pilots than fighter jets, she added. This is almost certainly true. So they are being provided with maybe as many as 85 F-16s at the moment, but getting 85 F-16 pilots, and spares really, is a really tall order in the time frame that has been allotted for this. And there have been many who say that the US are not training enough. They're putting 12 pilots through at any given time. The idea that they're deliberately delaying, though, I think is problematic. I want to know if that's the actual words that were used and what that entails. So there's deliberateness can be seen in several ways. It's like we are deliberately not taking on more pilots because that would screw up our own pilot training provision. So there's a deliberateness to that. Or it's like we are deliberately delaying you. We want you, Ukraine, to fail to get enough pilots. And I can't see that's the case. It's not that because they wouldn't be allowing this at all. If they really didn't want Ukraine to prevail, they'd be like, well, we're not doing any pilot training. So language is really important. I don't know whether this is exactly what the Utsinova actually said or how they said it. But like last night in the live stream with Greg, I was talking about how some people have said this is Biden's fault, as if Biden controls the amount of pilots that are trained at US Air Force bases. Like that's below him. That's not the sort of detail he'll be looking into, but he is ultimately responsible. So he could say we're not, well, again, he would need to know that the US aren't providing enough pilots. Like this is about information exchange, right? Decisions get made down here. Person at the top says, okay, you need to go and do X, Y, and Z. So go and do these kind of big general things. Then other people implement that. The question is, does Biden get the feedback about the amount of pilots that are needed for Ukraine to operate successful F-16 missions? Or does that go to the DOD and stays in the DOD? Does that go up to National Security Council and stay with, say, Jake Sullivan and John Kirby? At what point is this sorted out? So John Ridge, for example, said back when the news came out that the US were only able to train 12 pilots, he said, so he said Mirage 2005F should be acceptable for cruise missiles, blah, 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 talking about Mirages. And then someone said, I think this decision is because the US. So then it was the idea that the US are only providing 12. Someone said, I think this decision is because the US can't or doesn't want to expand training mission for Ukrainian F-16 pilots. John Ridge then said, that's a US Air Force issue. US Air Force is religiously opposed to giving up US pilot slots. So it's not the NSCs, not the National Security Council. So it's not Jake Sullivan and John Kirby playing politics, as many have claimed. And that's a line I've been discussing, or line I've been adopting as we discussed this. But I don't particularly know. But that makes sense to me. It makes much more sense that the US says, right, we have our own, like, it's way more, the US Air Force at least, not a political decision, not a strategic decision, but US Air Force decision saying that, like, we have to look after our own pilots first and foremost before we take on more pilots and train them up. Right, the number one priority is US pilots, so that we can provide our country with the pilots they need to fight, so on and so forth. And I get that, and that makes way more sense to me. So the idea that the US Air Force themselves would damage the chances of training enough of their own pilots to train more Ukrainian pilots, I think is unrealistic. It's interesting that John Ridge goes on to say that actually, ideally, or in this situation, they probably should go forward, the US Air Force, with damaging their own, like, training capabilities in order to have Ukraine succeed. He sees that as more important, as I think we all would. But this is a US Air Force thing compared to I think a Biden administration thing. Ultimately, this is a policy matter as far as I'm concerned, says John Ridge. The US Air Force should be given a policy directive and told to execute it, and poo-pooing proposals for how to do that doesn't help. And if that means throwing US Air Force trainees under the bus, then so be it. We need to prioritize winning the war that is currently ongoing versus the one that may or may not happen. And that's an interesting point. So that, you know, that's going back to the idea John Ridge believes that if it means right now that you don't get enough US Air Force pilots trained, so be it. The more important pressing objective is Ukraine winning the war. How that gets decided, how that all gets solved, I don't know. I don't know that information conduit between the US Air Force, DoD, NSC, Biden. You know, but somewhere around this whole process, there are not enough Ukrainian pilots being trained. And the same could possibly be said about Denmark and Romania. Now, there have been claims about, so there was talk about getting Greek F-16s and so on and so forth, but there was this whole idea that there's just not enough trainers. It's the infrastructure. You just can't magic the infrastructure to train all these pilots when, you know, you're probably operating at the bare minimum as it is in previous years. There's ideas in France, apparently, that there are retired pilots being pulled out of retirement to help train the Ukrainians, and you know, that seems to me eminently sensible. Anyway, I don't know that there's any solution I can give here, but just that there are two sides to the argument. Now, Italy will transfer Storm Shadow to Ukraine, according to an Italian newspaper with reference to sources. Long-range missiles are to be part of Rome's next military aid package, along with SAMP-T air defense systems. So that's a Patriot equivalent by and large, to be announced at the end of the month. So that's really good news. Storm Shadow missiles are exactly what Ukraine needs. They need these distance munitions to strike Russia without losing troops themselves and take out key installations. Right, Ukraine is still waiting for an air defense system Canada promised more than a year ago, said Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba. In 2023, Canada announced plans to supply Kyiv with long-range NASAMS, but there is still no delivery date. Now, many will say that this is a fault of the Americans in this case, or at least the manufacturers. There's some issue with the manufacturing of this. It's not like Canada's fault that the air defense system hasn't been built yet. But then others will come back. So Colby Badwa, who's very critical of his own Canadian government, will say that actually it's the Canadians' fault for just ordering the wrong thing. They should have understood better what was needed and how best to use $400 million, right? so there are arguments that continue concerning this system and the fact that it hasn't found its way to Ukraine yet. Now, speaking of Colby Badwa and getting on to talk of NATO, he says a 2024 NATO estimate of member defence spending has been published in full. The following 23 countries are spending at least 2% of GDP on defence. So remember, back in, was it 2014, only 3 countries, the US, the UK and Greece, spent 2%. And that's because the UK, to be honest, at the time under Cameron, changed funding of armed forces pensions and put that under defence spending, and that bumped us over 2%. There are different ways. In fact, I think you might talk about this down here. Note that NATO takes a fairly expansive view of what qualifies as defence spending. Things like non-militarised coast guards, military pensions and spending on peacekeeping efforts are included. Some countries may report civilian intelligence spending as defence too. The US does not. Also, reminder that these are just estimates subject to future revision. So there are some grey areas in how you do maybe some somewhat creative accounting might be taking place. But what we have here is a list that's far greater than we had back in 2014. So from 3 countries to 23 countries in 10 years is phenomenal. As in, that's a large amount of money given towards defence that wasn't being given towards defence. And it's a bit like turning a tanker. You don't just pull that money out your back pocket or get it from behind a sofa. So let's recognise that is a really significant shift, although most of it will have been expedited by the war in Ukraine. Like, I don't think you would have had something. First of all, you wouldn't have had Sweden and Finland in this list at all, because they wouldn't have been part of NATO without the war in Ukraine having started. You've got Poland at the top with 4.32% of their GDP. That is relatively recent that they have done that, and they are still going. They were 3.9% last time I looked. Now they're 4.32%. They have ordered such a large amount of kit, predominantly from the US and South Korea. You've got Estonia now above the US at 3.43%, US on 3.38%. Then you've got Latvia 3.15, sorry. Greece over 3% as well. Greece has traditionally spent a lot because of their issues with Turkey. Then you've got Lithuania, Finland, Denmark, UK, Romania, North Macedonia, Norway, Bulgaria, Sweden, Germany, Hungary, Czechia, Turkey, France, Netherlands, Albania, Montenegro and Slovakia. And then, as Colby Badwa says, the deadbeats of the alliance, and that's absolutely how we should be branding them, are Croatia 1.81%, Portugal 1.55%, Italy 1.49%. So Italy is the big one there, as well as maybe Canada 1.37%. So those two really underspending on defence. I know that Canada, we had that discussion about Canada's. Is that Karen sent me her views on where Canada is with regard to NATO and defence and global geopolitics. Belgium 1.3, Luxembourg 1.29, Slovenia 1.29, Spain 1.28. Spain is the 4th biggest contributor to the EU, so it's a sizable economy, Spain, and to spend that little, be at the bottom of the barrel really with regard to defence spending, is pretty controversial, especially when, you know, they've got Patriots they could give, and they declined giving Patriots to Ukraine, and yet there they are spending, you know, next to, well, not next to nothing, but a lot less than other countries. Ukrainian Review says there was a discussion at a NATO mission to increase training. At this time, says the Canadian Defence Minister, I don't think the circumstances are favourable for the deployment of Canadian instructors in Ukraine. This is no doubt in response to France wanting to build up a coalition of trainers, of foreign trainers to go in and support Ukraine. Canada was one of the nations, I think, that said, yeah, we will be in principle up for that, and possibly stepping back from doing that. Now, JR sent me a Dutch article that says the Netherlands now meets NATO's defence standards, as do 22 other countries. So the Netherlands is up there, which is, I'm including this as a particular one because the outgoing Prime Minister Rutte is looking like he could get selected for NATO. In fact, have I got that in the geopolitics section? There are rumours that he has been doing a deal with Viktor Orban to say that because Viktor Orban's one of the countries is presently not voting for Rutte or not endorsing Rutte. So he said, I think he said to Viktor Orban, look, we'll have a situation where you can vote, you can not help Ukraine, and we'll all help Ukraine, and that'll be some kind of informal, formal agreement. I'll allow that if you endorse me. But remember that Mark Rutte's Netherlands had, under Mark Rutte, not succeeded in spending 2% of GDP on defence historically. And so some of the criticisms of having Mark Rutte as head of next Secretary General of NATO is that actually that's kind of endorsing a failure to spend 2% until this war came along. So, yeah, it's some interesting arguments going, hanging around with regard to potential leaders of NATO. There's a Romanian leader, I think, and that might be why they've not yet endorsed. So Romania, Slovakia and Hungary have not endorsed Mark Rutte. I think the Romanian, is it the present leader or previous one, is in the mix. You've got Kaja Kallas, some people saying, from Estonia, but some are also saying that she's a bit too bellicose, a bit too of an anti-Russian person to have in NATO, like too obviously anti-Russian. I don't know. Germany. So just, I know this isn't aid to Ukraine, but just trying to understand where Europe is at, where the world is at with regard to defense spending and what this tells us about geopolitics and the Ukraine war and Russia. Germany is to purchase 20 additional Typhoon jets, according to Olaf Scholz. He's announced that Germany will buy those additional Eurofighter jets amidst heightened tensions following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So not only do we see Germany at 2.12%, they're looking at really strengthening their own defenses in a number of different ways. They are becoming a huge supporter of Ukraine, but all of this is in the context that we are at a point in history where I think we are involved in World War III, and buying another 20 fourth generation jets, I think is a pretty good indication that things aren't going well on the peace front. French aid to Ukraine says by 2025, Ukraine will be the world's second largest Caesar operator with more than 120 units. In 10 months, KNDS France will be able to produce 144 Caesar guns per year. That's 12 a month. This commitment will, quote, will show the ability to respond to the needs of Ukraine, but also to all European partners who are members of NATO and who are in the process of achieving their 2% of GDP investments in defence. In addition to KNDS France's 155mm complete shot shells produced in France, Belgium and Italy, a fourth production line will be set up in Ukraine. That is important. I believe the SAMP-T system will likely protect it, says French aid to Ukraine. Interesting. Okay, and then when you get these systems protecting, say you've got a French-Ukrainian co-production of artillery ammunition. You say, right, in order to protect that, we're going to bring in ourselves, be behind, maybe KNDS is supporting, maybe France is supporting a SAMP-T system being put in place there. Of course, that SAMP-T system isn't just protecting that one piece of infrastructure. It is protecting lots of stuff around there, and it just adds to the network coverage of air defense. TARS has stated, so a French manufacturer has stated that it will be increasing its capacity for 120mm mortar bomb production from 20,000 in 2023 to 80,000 in 2026. So over 3 years, that's doubling production. Basically, Ukraine need an absolute crap ton of these things. When you see proficient mortar crews, they are putting down those mortar bombs down the tube just consistently, the thump, thump, thump. Okay, and a single crew can get through an enormous amount of ordnance on a daily basis. This is one of the areas that they need millions of mortar bombs. They need so many more than they're presently getting manufacturing and so on and so forth. This is the one area Because mortars are really good. I mean, Andrew Perpetua bangs on about this the whole time. Mortars are really important for infantry, for attacks, for maneuvers, for giving you cover. It's just, they need a lot more mortar bombs, that's for sure. And then I just thought I'd show you this to end with. British Marines using a gravity jet suits to board high-speed ships. The suit delivers over 1,000 bhp of jet engine power, offering a thrilling experience similar to Iron Man. Can reach speeds of up to 136 kilometers an hour, 85 miles an hour, and a record flight time of over 25 minutes. I have to turn the sound off. So here we have Iron Man. I mean, that's pretty cool. And although this looks, you know, big and cumbersome, and you're wondering exactly what way this can be used effectively, you know, yes, it looks cool, but actually, what's the practical applications of this? You know, this is where you got to start. This is where you start your journey towards, you know, in 10 years' time, having a piece of kit that might be able to be used. I mean, we're talking science fiction here, but able to be used, produced at scale and used by all sorts of troops that then can start flying around in the air. And okay, it might make them more vulnerable, but you get the idea. Or you could have medivacs using this. I don't know. There is an interesting thought experiment to see, you know, where this kind of technology eventually goes. Anyway, I just thought I'd show you that. You got someone using that equipment to do pretty cool things. Flying around in the sea, landing on big or landing on naval vessels. Happy days. Anyway, I thought I'd leave you that. Thank you for watching. Take care. Please like, subscribe, and share. Do all that usual YouTube stuff. Stand on your left foot on a Tuesday morning while singing the national anthem. And I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.